High-performance computing for autonomous planetary exploration. Hello, my name is Khalid Sharif, and I'm very excited to present to you today the culmination of years of work that I've done alongside Jordan Ford from CMU, and we were advised by Red Whitaker of CMU and Yuland Wang of NASA. So 50 years ago, NASA pioneered a path to the moon. The Apollo 11 spaceflight landed the first humans on the moon's surface in 1969. And today our calling to explore the universe is greater than ever, not just the moon, Mars, and beyond. So we are returning to the moon in 2024, but this time to stay. So the last time we went to the moon, each moon flight carried 2 Apollo guidance computers, one in the command module and one in the Apollo lunar module, shown here. And the majority of software was written in assembly, and it was stored on rope memory. And that was the only software you could write at the time. And because the bulk of the software was on read-only rope memory, it could not be changed in operation. And pictured here, you can see astronauts on the surface of the moon, but they actually can't be deployed for long, especially in those circumstances, because the lunar surface is actually very hazardous. There's no protection from lethal micrometeorites that could enter with no atmosphere to burn in, or the cosmic radiation that always emanates from above. And speaking of the AGC, you can actually see a prototype of it. It's on display at the Computer History Museum if you're interested. So more than 50 years later, it's time to fundamentally rethink what kind of computing power we need on future space autonomous robots. And if we take an example from Earth, NVIDIA has released the Jetson AGX Xavier. And according to NVIDIA, these are intelligent machines that have the freedom to interact and navigate safely in their environments, unencumbered by complex terrain and dynamic obstacles, accomplishing real-world tasks with complete autonomy. So that works fine for self-driving cars. Does it work for lunar rovers as well, and with all the challenges that that kind of environment presents? That's what we're going to try to find out through this mission. And though discoveries to date have been made from orbiting satellites, only a surface rover can examine lunar pits from close range and finally solve this mystery. And here we say that autonomous surface robots will make the next great exploration as opposed to orbiting robots or satellites. So this work identifies and characterizes 4 algorithms that we think are very important to planetary roving and that are well suited for parallel computing. So on board the rover, we have a NVIDIA Jetson TX2. We also tried out the NX and the AGX to compare. So this is the look inside the rover. And let's talk a little bit about the autonomy on board the rover. So the rover has to operate entirely autonomously. Due to its small size, it actually cannot carry the long-range radio required for constant human supervision. And the rover will navigate away from the lander, so the lander would probably have dropped it off somewhere over here. And then it will perform a scientific mission, and then it will return to the lander to relay the discoveries. The lander actually has that radio, and it can transmit because it's a lot larger. But of course, it's relatively stationary. And what you're seeing here is a simulation of the rover that we built in Unreal Engine. You'll see a lot more of it during the presentation. So what is this need for autonomy? Where does it come from? So here I'm comparing the proposed rover on the left to the Opportunity rover in 2003. It landed on Mars in 2003. Continuous exploration planning and autonomy enable a 100-fold increase in speed, as shown down here. Even though this rover weighs a fraction of what this rover weighs, it actually moves a lot faster. And that's not necessarily because it has more power. It actually has a lot less power, because this one on the right has a nuclear battery, and this is solar-powered with regular batteries. So how does it achieve a much faster speed? Well, because it's fully autonomous. The Opportunity rover wasn't autonomous. It had to wait for commands and then perform them and wait again. And of course, with the time delay between you and Mars, that creates a very slow-moving rover on average, because most of the time it's actually stopped. However, when we look at our proposed rover, it only has 12 days for its mission, about 2 weeks. It's very different from this one, which is on Mars for about 12 years. And the reason for that is that we want a very small rover that can be very easily sent to the moon, and many others like it because it's like a standardized size and weight. And you want them to do relatively short missions because of multiple things: the battery on board and the radiation that it can handle. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a second. But the important takeaway from this slide is that autonomy achieves speed. And here the rover is moving towards one of the simulated pits that it wants to discover. And we'll talk about why we're very interested in lunar pits of this size. You can see how big they are compared to this tiny rover, and it has to approach and, collect data. So what kind of data are we talking about? So the micro rover wants to properly identify, would this place, would this pit be a suitable habitat? Does it have a cave? Why do we need a cave? Well, a cave is where the astronauts will come and build a shelter or build a base. When you build a lunar base, it's not like you see in the movies, the lunar base is on the surface. That would never work. It has to be protected underground. So here the micro rover has to autonomously select vantage points around this interesting geological aspect of terrain. So it moves around them and it navigates. And then once it's acquired data, it will come back to the lander, offload the data, and then the data is downlinked to Earth. So this is just a high-level overview of what the mission is trying to do. At a high level, it's the rover is deposited by the lander. It goes, collects scientific data of any kind, and then returns. So let's think about what are those 4 algorithms that I mentioned at the beginning that are very suitable or very relevant, let's say. So the first one is going to be dense stereo matching, and we studied that as it pertains to lunar environments. Because if you think about most stereo matching algorithms these days, they are very fine-tuned and tested specifically on pedestrian, maps, or self-driving cars would only look at a road, for example. And that's very different with all of its distinct features as compared to a driving on the moon, where everything looks just like sand, like gray sand. So it presents its own set of challenges that are quite unique to this particular situation. The other thing is going to be multi-view stereo. So if you've collected a lot of images, 2D images, from a bunch of locations, and you have a good estimate of what that location is, then you can do something called multi-view stereo. It's like the M part of SLAM, if you're familiar with that. The third thing that it would have to do is relay this information, especially if it's images. It would have to relay this in a very efficient way to the lander, because it only has a very small amount of time. When it's at the lander, it's actually just wasting time there. It has to deliver the information, and then it has to go back and do more science. So the less time we can spend on transmission, the more battery we save, and the more science time we can get out of it. The fourth one is triangle mesh compression. So let's say that you have a 3D model. That would probably be a triangular mesh covered by an image texture. The explanation of that is beyond the scope of this presentation, but the idea here is that if you can perform efficient triangle mesh compression on a 3D model, then you can very quickly send it back to Earth over radio. And this whole process is much more speeded up because it's specific compression towards triangle mesh. And this is different from the image compression. So we have to study both of them. So let's talk about the methodology. How do we test this out on Earth? Is there an Earth analog to that ginormous pit we saw on the moon? The answer is yes. It's in Utah. So the West Desert Sinkhole was used to measure the viability of our mission. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's called the West Desert Sinkhole in Utah. You have to off-road an hour to get here. It's pretty interesting. It was fun too. But you can see one of my teammates is walking next to it to give you an idea of the size. So our rover collected more than 40,000 images at the 26 vantage points around the rim. So we could have a really good data set. And what we're trying to do here is not only measure the viability of the mission, but also how accurate is that 3D model that you get compared to the ground truth. Because we would really need to know if there's a cave inside and we can use it, how big is it, how far down is it, and what, would it actually be safe to take astronauts down there? And to compare the 3D model that we get from the rover or from the lander, we used a LiDAR, a Faro focus, and it's capable here of 3.5 millimeter precision. And to give you an idea of scale, this pit is about 40 meters in depth, and it's shaped like a shoe. You'll see. So here's what that LiDAR scan looks like. It actually has like this heel-shaped structure over here, and this would be perfect for a cave. You have good shelter from above. This is actually really big. It looks small. That's just because this is about 25 meters in diameter. So this is a combination of 44 co-registered LiDAR scans, and this forms our geometric ground truth. So how accurate would it be compared to the 3D model that was used, that was generated by the rover-lander combo? So on your right, you can see the computer model compared to the LiDAR, and you can see, like, at least on a qualitative basis, they look relatively similar. The thing we're interested in most is this heel section of this boot. So this part is the cave, and it's actually gotten it quite well. We can see this again from a top-down view, right? Because the side view was a bit messy. But here we can see this cavernous region over here. I hope you can see it on your monitors. It's very, very similar to this. But this is all qualitative, right? We have to assess this quantitatively, otherwise we're not real scientists. So let's assess it quantitatively. So we calculate the median and interquartile range for the point-to-plane deviation. So this is just giving you an idea of the Q3, Q1, and median. For every depth, we discretize the depth that we're interested in, so it's about minus 25. The rest of the foot reaches 40, but we're only interested in this region. And for that, we can see that we actually get very close to ground truth. And this is very accurate ground truth of a spread over a very wide area. But the reason for discretizing this is that once you go beyond this, it becomes way too dark to actually get any good information. So we have very big deviation after we get past that heel point. But from 0 to around minus 25, which is the region that we care about, we are less than 10 centimeters away from ground truth. So that was very pleasing to see. That's actually useful from a scientific perspective and also from a mission planning perspective. We also did a lot of performance testing on the Jetsons. You can read more about it in my peer-reviewed published paper with the same title, High Performance Computing for Autonomous Planetary Exploration. We have these charts and this analysis and more for every Jetson that we tested out. So we tested out the TX2, radiation-hardened versions of them, by the way, TX2, NX, and AGX, and we made a lot of recommendations based on what we found. So going back to the original 4 algorithms that are relevant to our mission, when we talked about transmitting around 10,000 images from that rover to the lander, it's going to take around 200 gigabytes of space. But what we did is, if we then instead convert them to a video and then use traditional hardware-accelerated transcoding, for example, such as H.264, we can actually achieve a 32 times compression ratio and a 22 times speed up, and this really helped because trying to transmit 200 gigabytes would have taken at least an hour, maybe. And the other thing that we wanted to talk about is that when we convert from these images to the 3D model, we actually achieve a really good compression rate because there's a lot of redundancy in this data. What we really care about is this textured mesh. And that can actually be transmitted into Earth in a reasonable time, as opposed to the naive implementation, which would be to just transmit the images back to Earth and then do all this computation on Earth. We actually found that that would be impossible, but by going from the images to the model, we make this very achievable. Because again, the model only takes 600 megabytes of space, as opposed to 200 gigabytes. So that was a lot of information. Let's summarize it in our conclusion. So when it pertains to our specific mission, when we talk about autonomous roving, the robotics, the autonomy, and the algorithms necessary for all of that have been carefully studied. And then we also we demonstrated the viability of our proposed mission, lander, rover, going and coming back, and then the accuracy of that 3D model that you actually get that has been demonstrated using what we call a terrestrial analog. And so once we prove it on a terrestrial analog, we are then paving the way towards a real mission on the moon. And our results demonstrate the promising capacity for modern embedded computers such as the Jetson to expand the range and pace of planetary rover exploration. Thank you for listening.